Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been planning this day for months. My dog absolutely loves the beach, but the frustrating thing is that she's never allowed to run free. She's a big German Shepherd with boundless energy, and watching her strain against her leash whenever we visit the public beach breaks my heart a little. So when I found out you could rent a private stretch of beach for events, I immediately booked it for her birthday. I invited all my friends with dogs, mostly big ones like mine, and we had about 15 large dogs ready for the best beach day ever. The beach club that owns this stretch set everything up beautifully with umbrellas, comfortable beds, and even a small refreshment station. They placed signs at the clubhouse stating the area was reserved for a private event, and there were smaller signs at the boundaries of the private section, though no actual physical barrier separated it from the public beach. It was during Chinese New Year weekend, so the adjacent public beach was absolutely packed with families. I noticed a few people wandering onto our private section, probably missing the signs in all the commotion. They stayed at the edges, and since we had plenty of space, I didn't mind. The dogs were having the time of their lives, running, splashing, playing fetch. I'd never seen my girl so happy, zooming up and down the shoreline with her new friends. We started the game of fetch, throwing a ball as far as we could, sending the whole pack racing after it. Their excitement was contagious, and everyone at our party was laughing and cheering them on. That's when I noticed them. A couple with a young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old. They had set up much closer to us than the other boundary crossers, right near our nicest umbrella setups. Still, they kept to themselves initially, and the boy was quietly playing with some sand toys. Everything changed when our dogs raced past their setup during an especially enthusiastic round of fetch. One of my friend's labs shook off right next to their son, spraying him with water. The boy immediately started screaming and rocking back and forth. The woman walked over to me, her face twisted with anger. She demanded that I control our dogs immediately and called our behavior completely unacceptable. I apologized that the dogs had disturbed her son and explained they were just playing. She scoffed at this explanation and accused me of selfishly monopolizing the beach. She complained that our dogs were scaring away other beachgoers and insisted they were required to be on leash at all times. Her husband joined her, looking equally annoyed. He told me that their son was autistic and sensitive to loud noises and unexpected movements. He pointed out that our dogs were triggering a meltdown and urged me to look at their distressed child. I expressed my understanding and apologized for their son's upset, but explained that I had actually rented this section of beach specifically for the dogs to run free as part of a private event. The woman laughed dismissively at this claim. She questioned how it could be private when there were other families present, gesturing to the handful of other people who had wandered in from the public section. I clarified that those people had wandered in despite the signs, but were keeping their distance and not complaining. I suggested that since their son was clearly distressed by the dogs, it would probably be better for everyone if they moved to the public beach. The woman was incredulous that I would tell them to leave and accused me of discriminating against them because they had an autistic child. I waved over one of the beach club employees who confirmed that yes, I had reserved the entire section for a private event, and yes, the couple would need to move to the public beach. The husband started to apologize and gather their things, but the woman continued to protest. The beach club employee repeated that they needed to return to the public beach area. About 20 minutes later, I spotted them again. They had snuck back in at the far boundary of our section, trying to set up where they thought we wouldn't notice. I pointed them out to the beach club employee, who once again asked them to leave. Some of my friends thought I was being too harsh. One suggested that perhaps we could let them stay at the very edge since they were pretty far away now and the child seemed to be having a rough day. I explained that I had specifically booked this beach so we wouldn't have to worry about disturbing anyone. If they stayed, we'd have to be constantly mindful of not triggering their son. When the staff approached them again, the woman absolutely lost it. She shouted that they had just as much right to be there as anyone else and accused us of discriminating against a disabled child. When the employee tried to escort them out, she suddenly shoved me hard in the chest, causing me to stumble backward into the water. She blamed me for everything, claiming that entitled dog people think they own everything. The beach club security quickly intervened, and they called the police. The woman was escorted off the premises, screaming about discrimination the entire time, while her husband apologized profusely, looking mortified. The police took statements and told her she was being charged with assault. They also explained that trespassing on a privately reserved venue after being asked to leave multiple times was, in fact, illegal. The rest of the day was peaceful. My dog had the best birthday ever, blissfully unaware of all the human drama. And I learned an important lesson about standing my ground when I've made proper arrangements and someone else thinks their needs should supersede mine. Next year, though, I might look into a fully fenced private beach option. I've been dealing with a chronic disease for years. Most days it's manageable, but every few weeks I need to visit the hospital for infusions to keep things under control. Despite this health situation, I've always been able to maintain a full-time job, though it sometimes requires working remotely during treatment days. In 2021, I was assigned to a new project with a manager who was obsessed with rigid workplace rules. He was the epitome of micromanagement, the type who watched the clock like a hawk, frowned upon any personal conversations among team members, and seemed to think that physical presence in the office was somehow magically more productive than remote work. The irony was that our entire team was classified as external, and most of us lived quite far from the office. My commute alone was over an hour each way, but this didn't matter to him. He wanted us in that office as much as possible, watching us like we were school children who couldn't be trusted. Since he discouraged any personal conversations or chit-chat as he called it, I never had the opportunity to mention my chronic condition. It wasn't something I typically led with anyway, but in most work environments, you eventually get to know your colleagues enough to share these kinds of details. Not in this case. One Tuesday morning I was at the hospital for my regular infusion. The sessions typically lasted several hours, but I had brought my laptop and planned to work through it as usual. We had our daily team meeting scheduled for 10 a.m., and I figured I could just dial in without video. The meeting started, and I joined the call from my hospital bed with a cannula in my arm and an IV drip running. I made sure my microphone was working properly so I could participate verbally. As soon as I joined, the manager pointed out that I didn't have my camera on. I simply replied that I wouldn't be using video for this call. I didn't give any explanation because it was just a short 15-minute meeting, and I could participate perfectly well using just audio. For all he knew, I could have been driving or in some other situation where video wasn't practical. The meeting continued normally with everyone giving their updates. When my turn came, I shared all the necessary information about my project milestones and upcoming deadlines. Everything was covered efficiently, just as it should be. At the end of the meeting, the manager wrapped things up and asked everyone to have a productive day. Then he specifically asked me to stay on the call for a moment. After everyone else had left, he immediately started scolding me about not having my camera on. He reminded me that the team policy required everyone to show their faces during video conferences. He claimed it was about team cohesion and making sure everyone was fully engaged. I tried to explain that today I was in a situation where I prefer not to use video, but he wouldn't accept this. He insisted that the rules applied to everyone, and if I was working, I needed to be visible. His tone grew increasingly stern as he told me it was non-negotiable. He demanded that my camera be on for all future meetings and asked if that was clear. At this point, I realized he wasn't going to let this go. I decided that if he wanted to see me so badly, he could see all of me. I told him that if he insisted, I would turn my camera on right then. When I clicked the video button, I watched his expression completely transform. His face went from angry red to ghostly white in seconds as he took in the scene. Me sitting in a hospital bed, medical equipment surrounding me, an IV line visibly running into my arm, and the sterile hospital room environment behind me. For several seconds, he just stared without saying anything. I explained that I was currently receiving medical treatment and had been trying to be professional by keeping my camera off. I thought this might be distracting or uncomfortable for the team, but if seeing my face was that important to him, here I was. He stammered, asking why I hadn't said something. I reminded him that he had made it clear he didn't approve of personal conversations during work hours. I added that my medical condition wasn't something I typically discussed in professional settings anyway, especially not during a team meeting. He started fidgeting nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the situation he had created. He tried to backtrack, suggesting that in this case, an exception would be appropriate, and that I could have just mentioned my situation. I asked if there was anything else he needed to discuss about the project because I should probably focus on my treatment. He quickly said no and told me to take care of myself. After ending the call, I couldn't help but smile a little. His sweaty, uncomfortable face had been quite satisfying to witness. It was one of those rare moments of vindication that I still think about whenever I encounter rigid rule followers who lack basic empathy or flexibility. In the following weeks, I noticed he became much less insistent about camera usage during meetings. He also started allowing more remote work days for the entire team. I never explicitly discussed my condition with him, and he never directly mentioned the incident, but something had definitely changed in his approach to management. Sometimes people need a reality check to remember that employees are human beings with lives and circumstances that don't always fit neatly into corporate policies. I just happened to provide that check in a rather dramatic fashion. I've been in law enforcement for over 12 years now. I've seen it all, the good, the bad, and the downright ridiculous. But there's one arrest that still makes me chuckle whenever I think about it. It happened about 3 years ago. During what started as a routine night shift, I always knew I wanted to be a police officer. My father was on the force for 30 years, and his stories of helping people and making a difference in the community inspired me. After college, I went straight to the police academy, graduated near the top of my class, and landed a job in my hometown department. I worked my way up from traffic stops to more serious cases, earning the respect of my colleagues through hard work and dedication. That night, I was patrolling the downtown area, which is known for its strip of bars and nightclubs. It was around 2 a.m. right after closing time when I spotted her. A woman in a sparkly dress stumbling down the sidewalk, barely able to walk in her high heels. She was trying to get into her car, fumbling with her keys against the door lock. I pulled up beside her and stepped out of my patrol car. I told her to step away from the vehicle in a firm but professional tone. The woman turned to look at me, her eyes unfocused and mascara smudged down her cheeks. She slurred that she was fine and just trying to go home. I explained that she appeared intoxicated and that I couldn't allow her to drive. I asked to see her identification. She accused me of harassment and claimed she had only consumed 2 alcoholic beverages that evening. She swayed as she spoke, nearly falling over. I could smell the alcohol from several feet away. I told her that she would need to perform a field sobriety test. She refused, declaring that she was aware of her legal rights. She attempted to turn back to her car but tripped over her own feet and fell against the door. I announced that I was placing her under arrest for public intoxication and asked her to put her hands behind her back. That's when things escalated. When I approached her with handcuffs, she started screaming. She demanded that I not touch her, insisted she had connections, and mentioned that her brother-in-law practiced law. Despite her protests, I managed to get the handcuffs on her, but when I tried to guide her to my patrol car, she went completely limp, forcing me to practically carry her. When I opened the back door and attempted to help her into the seat, she suddenly became very active again. In one swift motion, she leaned back against me and then kicked out with surprising force for someone so intoxicated. Her stiletto heel connected directly with my face, hitting me just below my right eye. The pain was immediate and sharp. I could feel blood trickling down my cheek as I finally managed to get her into the back seat and close the door. After calling for backup and getting a quick check from my partner, who confirmed I would need a few stitches but was otherwise okay, we headed to the station. About halfway there, the woman seemed to have a moment of clarity, or at least as much clarity as someone that drunk could have. She asked if I had read her Miranda rights and questioned what she had done to deserve arrest. I explained that she had kicked me in the face and was being charged with assault on a police officer. She denied the accusation and claimed I had no evidence to support my allegation. I looked in the rearview mirror, seeing the clear shoe print on my face and the small cut below my eye still oozing blood. I pointed out that her footprint was still visible on my face. There was a moment of silence as she tried to process this information. Then she insisted it was false information, demanded legal representation, and threatened to sue me for police brutality. I advised her that everything in the patrol car was being recorded, including her assault. I acknowledged her right to an attorney, but suggested she refrain from speaking until she was sober. She shouted that she was completely sober and accused me of discrimination. When we arrived at the station, she continued her tirade, now claiming she was a personal friend of the mayor and would have my badge. The booking officers just rolled their eyes. They'd heard it all before. The next morning I came in to file my report, my face now sporting 4 stitches and an impressive bruise in the distinctive shape of a stiletto heel. As I walked past the holding cells, I noticed my attacker from the night before, now sober and looking absolutely miserable. She spotted me and her eyes widened at the sight of my face. She asked with shock if she was responsible for my injury. I confirmed that she was indeed the cause. She expressed remorse and admitted she had no memory of the incident, asking if her behavior had really been as bad as it seemed. I reminded her that she had claimed I lacked evidence of her kick while the proof was visibly displayed on my face. She put her head in her hands and asked with resignation if she was going to jail. I confirmed that she was, explaining that assault on a police officer was considered a serious offense. What made this my favorite arrest wasn't just the irony of her claiming there was no proof while the proof was literally imprinted on my face. It was what happened during her court appearance. Her lawyer tried to argue that she was too intoxicated to form intent, but then the prosecution played the patrol car video showing her coherent enough to deny the assault and claim lack of evidence. The judge was not amused. The woman ended up with community service, probation, mandatory alcohol treatment, and a fine to cover my medical expenses. I heard the experience was actually a wake-up call for her. She completed her alcohol treatment program and now speaks at local schools about the dangers of excessive drinking. The scar healed nicely, but I'll always have the story of the most obvious assault evidence in department history. A perfect stiletto print delivered right to my face. I've always been a night owl, so when I landed the night auditor position at a small downtown hotel, it felt perfect. The job was straightforward: handle check-ins for late arrivals, process the daily financial records, and keep an eye on the property while everyone else slept. I enjoyed the peace and solitude of working from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. and had established a comfortable routine over my first 10 months at the job. My sleep schedule was carefully calibrated. I'd arrive home around 7:30 a.m., eat a light breakfast, and be asleep by 9. I'd wake up around 5 p.m., have dinner, and relax before heading to work again. After my gallbladder removal surgery 3 months ago, maintaining this schedule became even more important. My digestive system was still quite sensitive, and I had a growing list of foods I needed to avoid. That's why I was less than thrilled when I saw the notice on the employee bulletin board. Mandatory all-staff meeting. Tomorrow at 12 p.m., new policies and procedures to be discussed. Lunch provided. Attendance required. I immediately went to find my manager, a man who'd been running the hotel for about 5 years and had a talent for making simple things needlessly complicated. I asked the manager if I could skip the meeting since the topics didn't apply to my position. He refused, insisting it was mandatory for all staff without exception. When I explained that it would be during my normal sleeping hours and I'd be exhausted, he dismissed my concern, saying everyone else had to attend and it would be unfair if I received special treatment. I tried arguing that maintenance and housekeeping topics didn't affect the night audit position at all, but he cut me off and warned that I needed to be there at noon or I'd be written up. That was the end of our discussion. I left his office fuming, but was a plan forming. If he wanted me at a meeting during what was essentially my middle of the night, he'd get exactly what he asked for. After my shift ended the next morning, I made several phone calls and finally located what I needed at a department store about 20 miles away. I drove there, made my purchase, and returned home for a brief nap before the meeting. At precisely noon, I shuffled into the conference room where my co-workers were already gathered. Conversation gradually died down as people noticed my appearance. I wore plaid flannel pajamas, a dark blue bathrobe tied loosely at the waist, and my hair was intentionally mussed. I had even dabbed some makeup under my eyes to emphasize the dark circles that were already there naturally. But the crowning touch, the piece de resistance, were the brand new fuzzy bunny slippers on my feet, complete with floppy ears and button eyes. The room fell silent as I yawned dramatically and dropped into a chair in the back corner. The manager demanded to know what I thought I was doing, adding that this was a professional workplace. I explained that for me it was currently 3 a.m. and this was what I typically wore that hour. Since he had insisted on my attendance, I had complied. Some co-workers snickered, which only intensified the redness spreading across the manager's face. He sputtered that my attire was completely inappropriate and I should have dressed properly. I pointed out that his mandatory meeting notice hadn't specified a dress code, and I was perfectly covered up. Then I asked sarcastically if there was some important information he needed to share with me that couldn't have been put in a memo. He glared at me but proceeded with the meeting. For the next hour and a half, he droned on about housekeeping protocols, maintenance schedules, and front desk check-in procedures, none of which had anything to do with my job responsibilities. When lunch was served, I discovered it was a cheesy chicken and rice casserole loaded with onions, bell peppers, jalapenos, and enough oil to lubricate a car engine. Every single ingredient was on my absolutely cannot eat after gallbladder surgery list. As everyone else ate, I approached the manager again. I asked him to confirm that he had required me to disrupt my sleep schedule to attend a meeting where nothing, literally nothing, pertained to my job. I also pointed out that the lunch he provided had every ingredient that I couldn't eat since my surgery. I wanted to be clear about the complete pointlessness of my being there. He started to mutter something about team unity, but I cut him off. I stated that this was a waste of my time and that I wouldn't be attending any more of these mandatory meetings. I told him that if there was something specific I needed to know about my actual job duties, he could leave me a note. I turned and walked out, bunny slippers flopping with each step. To my surprise, I wasn't written up. In fact, I was never invited to another daytime meeting again. Memos appeared in my inbox when there was something I needed to know, and life went on. The manager left about a year later, and though I did attend his going-away party, properly dressed, I never had to sacrifice my sleep for an irrelevant meeting again. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.